All right, guys, thank you for coming. This is...
Love you, Dan.
Thank you. I'm Dan Sellers, and this is Carolina Haints. Chapter 16, Joe Baldwin and the Mako Light. Grover Cleveland was the 22nd President of the United States. He served in office in the late 1800s, before the widespread production of the automobile. So, like those who served before him, he relied on the rail service when traveling the country. Cleveland's train pulled into Mako Station on an unusually warm February night in 1889. His days in office were numbered. He knew that this was most likely his last train ride as president. He was a lame duck president. He had lost the re-election campaign to that Republican clout, Benjamin Harrison, and in just 2 weeks' time, he would be out of office. So nobody could blame him if he had arrived at the station in a foul mood. But on the contrary, he was in fine spirits. He took a stroll along the tracks and was quite courteous to the folks that he met, talking with each one at length before moving on. It was at this point that he noticed the signalman using two lanterns, a red one and a green one. He knew that the traditional train signal was a single white light, so he asked the man about it. The story began 30 years prior, in the spring of 1867, a few miles outside of Wilmington. A light, misting rain fed the fog that hung thick in the air. A lonely country road hugged the Wilmington-Manchester Railroad track, and together they cut a path through the eastern North Carolina swamps and pines to their destination, the depot in the small community of Mako, North Carolina. Joe Baldwin was in the caboose of the train as the train neared Mako Station. Suddenly the car lurched and began to lose speed. He rushed to the front of the car, opening the door to see the train receding in the distance. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But at night, with the fog and the rain, it was a different story. Joe knew that another train would be coming up the track in just a few minutes. In these weather conditions, the second train wouldn't be able to see the disabled caboose. For a second, Joe considered just running away, and who could blame him? But the second train was a passenger train, and if he abandoned his post, Joe thought, how many people would be hurt, or worse, killed? He had to try to warn them. He snatched the lantern from its post and went onto the small ledge at the back of the car. He heard the passenger train drawing near, and he frantically began waving the lantern to signal the conductor. It almost worked. The engineer of the passenger train saw Joe's signal and slammed on the brakes. The screeching whine of metal on metal echoed through the darkness as the train fought to arrest its momentum. But in the end, Joe was too late. The second train was not able to stop in time. As Joe's car crept over the trestle of Rattlesnake Creek, the passenger train slammed into it, killing him, and some say severing his head from his body. A head that was lost in the swamp and never found. Or so the legend goes. It wasn't very long after the terrible accident that claimed Joe's life when people started reporting seeing the strange light along the tracks at night. Oddly, it almost always followed the same path. It would appear around a mile outside Mako Station near the Rattlesnake Creek trestle. It was dim at first, moving slowly, but as it went along, it would grow brighter and faster. Occasionally, it would zigzag back and forth as it moved forward. It moved like a man swinging a lantern, never strayed more than a few feet from the tracks. More often than not, once it reached a certain point on the rails, it reversed itself, eventually ending up in the exact place it had started from. Then it was said to fade from view, often to reappear only a half hour or an hour later to repeat the same cycle. Locals say it was the ghost of old Joe Baldwin searching for his lost head. The light would manifest itself regularly, especially in the early 1900s. It was rare for a calendar month to pass without the light making an appearance, sometimes showing itself several nights in a row. A lot has changed in the 150 years since Joe's fateful accident. At that time, the area was known as Rattlesnake Grave, a sleepy spot in the northern tip of Brunswick County. Eventually, because of Joe Baldwin's fateful accident, Rattlesnake Grave came to be known as Mako. In 1977, the railroad tracks were removed and the trestle over Rattlesnake Grave was dismantled. Unfortunately, since then, the sightings of the Mako light have all but stopped. Before the tracks were removed, the Mako light could manifest at any time. It seemed to appear most often during the summer months. In fact, the phenomenon happened with such regularity that it soon began to disrupt rail service. Engineers would often misinterpret the light as a warning signal and stop their train on the tracks. For safety concerns, the railroad company ordered that the standard white warning light be discontinued in the vicinity of Mako Station. Instead, they were told to use two lights. You guessed it, a red one and a green one, just like President Cleveland witnessed. It's thought that the president did not see the Mako light for himself, but he was intrigued nonetheless, and he shared Joe Baldwin's tale when he returned to Washington. And suddenly, the Mako lights garnered national attention, leading to an increase of tourism to the tiny bird. The psychics, professors, investigators, and scores upon scores of curious onlookers made the journey south. Over the years, thousands of people have visited the area in the hopes of witnessing the spectacle for themselves. By the 1950s and 60s, in the midst of all this exposure, the Mako light peaked in popularity, when dozens of people would park on the road beside the track each night and watch for the light to make an appearance. Many people came to Mako in order to explain away the mystery. Even the Smithsonian Institution investigated the phenomenon after President Cleveland brought it to their attention. Over the years, many theories have been presented to explain Mako lights. Many of them sound like just the theories presented to explain the brown nut lights in Linville. And just like those theories, none of them hold up to rational analysis. As you would expect, some people chalked up the lights to swamp gas or St. Elmo's fire, or the reflection of car headlights from the nearby highway. Even though the lights were reported far before the automobile came to rural eastern North Carolina, St. Elmo's fire happens only during electrically charged thunderstorms, whereas the Mako light could be seen at any time. Anyone who has seen swamp gas would know that it would not confine itself to staying only above the tracks. Swamp gas would naturally drift throughout the swampy woodland without direction or cause. Eventually, the United States Army got involved. A machine gun detachment was sent from Fort Bragg under orders to either discover the source of the mystery or blast it to oblivion. However, the light did not show itself while the Army was in town. One interesting theory involves a fault line that hypothetically runs beneath the tracks. Although no final fault line has ever been found, earthquakes have been felt in Wilmington, Charleston, and Savannah. Mako lies at the northern end of the proposed line. The theory speculates that the Mako light was caused by static electricity produced by the pressures imposed by the fault line. The static charge would use the steel train tracks as a conductor and discharge as light along their path. This theory explains why the light has not been seen since the tracks were removed. Of course, various psychics and ghost hunters have maintained that the light is Joe Baldwin, unaware that he's passed away, vehemently trying to warn oncoming trains. Similar headless conductor stories have been associated to other alleged ghost lights around the country. The Bragg Road light of southeast Texas, the Paulding light in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, and the Gurdon light of Arkansas, which ironically also runs atop the New Madrid fault line. However, the Mako Light manifested many years before any of these others, and some say is the inspiration for those stories. Many magazine and newspaper articles have been written about the phenomenon. The Wilmington Star News covered the light several times over the years. Even Life magazine read an article in 1957, an era when the magazine was at its height of popularity. A man named James Burke researched the records in the Wilmington Railroad Museum and found no record to indicate that anyone named Joe Baldwin had been killed in the tracks. However, another story was found, remarkably similar to the legend. A conductor named Charles Baldwin took his train to a true party that had become decoupled and was stranded on the tracks. Misjudging his speed, Baldwin slammed into the helpless car. Although Charles was not decapitated in the accident, he died a few days later from his injuries sustained in the accident. The report laid the blame on Charles for failure to handle the engine of the train as required. Story. The Mako Light is the most frustrating story we've covered on Carolina Haints. The story itself is so old, there's no one to talk to who remembers anything. The best I could hope for is someone who potentially remembers the tracks before they were pulled up in 1977. That's supposedly when the ghostly sight of Joe Baldwin's glowing lantern was last seen. From researching the area itself, it feels like such a tease. From first glance at a map, it appears that Mako doesn't even exist anymore. But if you look close enough, it's there, west of Leland on Highway 74. The elusive Wilmington and Manchester Railroad was said to have derailed near the curvy spot in the tracks known as Rattlesnake Grade near Hood Creek. From a map, you can see Hood Creek running roughly north and south, crossing under I-74 or 76. If anything, Mako appears to be an unincorporated community in what has officially been designated Sandy Creek. Why officially? Because it's an unincorporated town with a town hall on Sandy Creek Drive. Okay, it's a double-wide trailer, but it's still a government building. But what tiny street should happen to sit cozily in between other two streets just blocks away from town hall? Well, that would be Joe Baldwin Drive. There's also Mako Road, which runs from Highway 17 near the community of Winnebago to Highway 74 in Sandy Creek. Near the Hardee's and Dollar General, what small street should Mako Road intersect with? And that would be Old Mako Road, which is just around the corner from the gas station, Mako Depot. Wherever I look, there are clues and connections with this story. It's infuriating. Well, I couldn't find Rattlesnake Creek anywhere in proximity. Just 30 miles north in Pender County is a small creek, barely visible on a map, and practically in the middle of nowhere, near the unincorporated community of Ivanhoe, with the name Big Rattlesnake Creek. Sandy Creek was incorporated in 1988, and so close to the town of Leland that they share the same zip code. According to the town's own website, the physical address of their own town hall is actually in Leland. A decade ago, Sandy Creek had a population of just 318 people. According to Brunswick County's Wikipedia page, Mako is one of 28 unincorporated communities in the county, along with 25 towns such as Bolivia, Charlotte, and Boynton Beach. I spoke with the town clerk, Marion Evans, who confirmed to me that Joe Baldwin Drive is in fact named after the folklore. Evans went on to say, quote, "The oldest local residents believe this area is where the train wreck occurred on the portions of railroad track that once ran through the area, now known as Sandy Creek," end quote. What a great example of old storytelling in history. Even the oldest residents of Sandy Creek wouldn't be old enough to remember the disaster, but their grandparents or their great-grandparents might. This is the very basis of folklore and tradition. Someone's granny tells them of the time she saw Joe Baldwin's lantern swinging back and forth at this very spot. That grandchild then tells their son the story, perhaps losing some of the panache or flavor Or who knows, the story could pick up steam and be full of embellishments. In this particular case, an elderly resident was told by someone who remembers, or perhaps who has seen the ghostly light themselves, then pass it along to the town clerk, who passed it to me. Now I humbly relate to you the closest thing you can get to visiting and being part of the story is taking a turn off I-74 and traveling a few blocks south to the little residential street of Joe Baldwin Drive. I asked if the tiny town of Sandy Creek had ever done anything to promote tourism by using the story. That was told me they did not. Perhaps they could embrace the tale and make a festival out of it, like nearby Bladensboro did with the famous Beast Fest. Or maybe they could hire a local storyteller to host a mention-lit story night for kids. I can't think of a better way to keep the tradition alive for future generations. A few weeks before this book's deadline was due, Jeffrey Cochran and I took a day trip to Sandy Creek to look at Joe Baldwin Drive in person. While there, we got a chance to meet Marion. She was able to point out for us the actual placement of the old train tracks. She told us to head back out toward Highway 74 and to look for an elevated impression just south of the roadway. According to Marion, the long strip of land where the tracks used to lie can be seen there. But what's more difficult to see is how it backs up to the houses that run along Joe Baldwin Drive. Jeff and I made our way back to the entrance to the small community. We got out of the car and walked along the side of the road. It wasn't immediately apparent to us where the tracks were. As I walked along the small bump in the ground, I'd been put in place for irrigation purposes. Jeff walked up a hill and then turned to me and said, "Here it is." I hastily made my way to him, and damn if he wasn't right. You could clearly see what Marion was talking about. It was a long, straight path through the woods, clear of brush and trees. The stretch of land was noticeably elevated and set approximately 50 to 100 feet south of the highway. We walked along it as far as we could without trespassing on private property. While walking along the path of what used to be the Wilmington and Manchester Railroad line, I was overcome with a desire for a metal detector to look for a railroad spike. I couldn't think of a better souvenir than an old, rusty, twisted hunk of metal, except for maybe a spooky old lantern. I eventually recalled my folklore, and it occurred to me that it's an incredibly bad idea to take something away from a haunted site. Many people have taken pieces of brick or stone from various places, infamous for their haunted legends, only to bring their souvenir back in a desperate attempt to make the haunting stop. I have enough problems to worry about. I'll stick to taking pictures. Thank you.
Way to go, Dan.
Ryan Lewis, everybody.
Woo!
Hudson Hurd.
Hey, thank you. Thank you.
Author of Carolina Haints, Jeffrey Cochran. Member of the research team, Sammy Castle.
Yay!
Thanks so much for coming.